In 1955, the international downing of United Airlines Flight 629 by a young man with a grudge against his mother shocked America. Here's how the FBI solved the case, calling on a range of investigative and forensic capabilities and working closely with the airline safety experts and other partners, all while laying down the groundwork for even more complex airline disasters down the road. United Airlines Flight 629 was using a Douglas DC-6B airliner named Mainliner Denver, piloted by World War II veteran Lee Hall on the evening of the incident. The flight had originated at New York City's LaGuardia Airport, making a stop in Chicago before continuing to Denver. It then took off from Denver, Colorado's Stapleton Airfield, bound for Portland, Oregon, with continuing service to Seattle. Minutes after the plane's departure from Denver, the DC-6B exploded, the flaming wreckage falling into farmland near Longmont, Colorado. There were no survivors. Jack's mother had been a passenger on Flight 629 and was travelling to Alaska to visit her daughter, Jack's half-sister. At the time, flight insurance could be routinely purchased in vending machines at airports until changes to the system in the 1980s. Jack's apparent motive for the bombing was to claim $37,500, equivalent to $410,000 worth of life insurance money from policies he had purchased in the airport terminal just moments before the aircraft's departure. At 6:52 p.m. on the 1st of November 1955, United Airlines Flight 629, a DC-6B with 44 persons aboard, took off from Stapleton Airport in Denver, Colorado, bound for Portland, Oregon. 11 minutes later, the 39 passengers, including an infant as well as 5 crew members, were deceased instantly when the airliner crashed on a sugar beet farm near Longmont, Colorado. Among the deceased was the wife and aide of President Eisenhower. Upon learning of the disaster, an official of the FBI immediately offered the services of the Bureau's Identification Division in identifying the victims of the tragedy. Fingerprint experts were dispatched from Washington, D.C. by plane, arriving at the scene of the crash on the next day. As the bodies were recovered, they were taken to Greeley, Colorado, and placed in a temporary morgue set up by the National Guard Armory. Upon the arrival of the FBI fingerprint agents, they learned that 9 of the bodies had been identified by relatives and friends or by personal effects that had been removed from the armory. The remaining 35 bodies were fingerprinted, and 21 of those fingerprinted were positively identified with fingerprints contained in the vast files of the FBI. Among the 14 victims printed and not identified by fingerprints, 2 were men and 12 were women. All of these were subsequently identified by relatives or personal effects. While these bodies were being identified on the 2nd and 3rd of November, agents of the Denver field office of the FBI were maintaining close liaison with the personnel of United Airlines and the Civil Aeronautics Board who were investigating the tragedy. The Civil Aeronautics Board were advised that the full facilities of the FBI laboratory were available if the investigators desired to use them in initial stages of their probe. At the request of the Civil Aeronautics Board, a laboratory expert was sent to the scene on the 2nd of November, and in conjunction with the Civil Aeronautics Board investigations, he conducted a visual examination and collected pieces of wreckage between the 2nd and 7th of November. In this manner, it was learned that the tail section of the plane had been cleanly severed from the rest of the plane as though cut with a knife and fallen with only minor damage at a point approximately 1 and 1.5 miles from the place where the engines and the nose section of the plane had also hit the ground in almost whole condition. Wreckage from the middle section of the plane was widely scattered over and behind the intervening area between the tail and the forward sections. During this period, a detailed examination of all parts of the wreckage was also made by engineers of United States Airlines, the Douglas Aircraft Corporation, and other private manufacturing concerns. But no possible cause of the explosion due to malfunction of any part of the plane was located by the examiners. On 7th of November 1955, the Chief of Investigations of the Civil Aeronautics Board officially stated that there were indications of sabotage. At the same time, he asked the FBI to institute an appropriate criminal investigation of which the crime had taken 44 lives. An active investigation was undertaken by the FBI on the 8th of November, with necessary agents being assigned to the case on a full-time basis. Specific assignments were made for these agents to correlate information from eyewitnesses to the crash and employees handling the plane prior to the crash, to trace all cargo, mail and baggage to the plane, to initiate and conduct background investigations of all passengers and crew members on the plane, and to supervise and conduct searches of the wreckage and remove baggage or personal effects for possible evidence and investigative leads. Between the 2nd and 5th of November 1955, 4 teams of interviewers, each consisting of Civil Aeronautics Board and United Airlines officials or employees, had interviewed approximately 200 individual occupants of the 140 square mile area surrounding the scene of the crash. Information furnished by 37 of these persons was considered of possible value and was reduced to signed statements. These statements were made available to the FBI upon initiation of the active investigation, and a complete review disclosed that all initial explosion had occurred while the plane was operating and in apparent routine manner. The explosion appeared to have been of tremendous force, causing fiery streamers to fall from the plane. A flare, which was normal equipment carried on the plane, had separated from the plane, ignited, and descended slowly. A second explosion, probably of one or more fuel tanks, occurred when the engines and forward compartment of the plane struck the ground. An additional witness, a control tower operator at Stapleton Airport, later said that he had observed the flash of light and the flare at exactly 7:03 p.m. Civil Aeronautics Board officials placed the location of the explosion at approximately 8 miles east of Longmont, Colorado, and at a calculated altitude of 10,800 feet above sea level, or 5,782 feet above the terrain. In order to properly organise and record the recovery of the wreckage and possible evidence, a surveyor had been hired to pilot and mark a baseline through the scene of the crash and approximate direction of the line of flight. Perpendicular lines had been established at intervals of 1,000 feet on the baseline extending to 1,000 feet from the baseline. This divided the entire area into 1,000 square foot plats or grids. A complete search of the area was then conducted, and as each piece of the wreckage or material was recovered and removed, it was marked for identification, and the location in which it was found was measured and recovered in relation to the boundaries of the plat. All material possible connected with the plane was recovered from platted areas. However, hunters and other persons continued to report finding of mail and insulation from the plane, and on the 13th of November 1955, an additional area extending up to 3 miles behind the point where the tail section had fallen was minutely searched by 10 FBI agents and 10 employees of the United Airlines. At the time, the wreckage, which had previously been collected by United Airlines employees, was re-examined by agents for any possible parts or remains of the bomb. All recovered wreckage from the central position of the plane, as well as all baggage, cargo, and personal effects, was taken to a large warehouse at Stapleton Airport and placed under guard. All mail was turned over to postal inspectors at the time of the recovery, but was made available by the inspectors for further examination where desired. At the warehouse, a full-size mock-up of the central section of the plane was made of wood and wire netting, and all parts of the planes were wired to the mock-up in their proper places. Upon completion of the mock-up assembly, the chairman of the Structure Investigating Committee of the Civil Aeronautics Board and the Douglas Aircraft Corporation engineer agreed that the explosion had occurred at Station 718 in the rear cargo pit. This point of explosion was further pinpointed as being almost directly across the cargo compartment from the cargo loading door. These conclusions were based on the fact that the stingers at this point had failed in outward bending, and pieces of heavy fuselage skin recovered and fitted into the area had been shattered into small pieces. Pieces of material from this area of the plane embedded in shoes containing luggage and in air freight known to have been carried in Cargo Pit 4 further indicated an explosion of tremendous force. Near Station 718, grey and black soot-like deposits were noted on several of the skin fragments adjacent to and within the roughly circular area. The central portion of the floor beam above the cargo pit contained similar deposits on the aft side, however, none were noted on the forward side. Copies of the waybills for all air freight shipments on the plane were obtained from United Airlines. By checking these waybills against the pieces of the shipments recovered, the contents or position of the contents, all of which shipments were identified. Nothing of an explosive or particularly inflammable nature was determined to have been included in the air freight shipments on the plane. It had been learned upon arrival at Denver all cargo and freight carried in Pit 4 had been removed to the forward cargo pit, and at the time of the crash, Cargo Pit 4 had contained only baggage and cargo loaded on other flights, as well as all cargo and baggage which had originated in Denver. During the terrain and wreckage search, 5 small fragments of sheet metal were found which could not in any way be identified with parts of the plane or known contents of the cargo. The fragments appeared to be badly burned and scarred, and to be coated with a grey soot-like deposit which might normally be associated with the residue from an explosion. On one side of one of the fragments was in red colour and bore the blue letters HO. Although it was not known at this time that the fragments were significant, an extensive effort was made to identify them in belief that they might have come from a destructive device of some nature. The fragment bearing the letters HO was eventually identified as a portion of the metal side of a 6-volt battery, of the type later determined to have been used as a detonating device of the bomb. An examination of fragments and pieces of the wreckage recovered from the crash scene by the FBI laboratory revealed them to possess foreign deposits ranging in colour from white to very dark grey. The initial summary of this information indicating the probable use of dynamite was first furnished to the Denver field office by the FBI laboratory on the 13th of November 1955. As the investigation process, efforts were pursued to develop complete background and data on each of the 44 individual victims, as well as any possible motive that anyone might have the commission of homicide against them. Similar investigations were indicated on all persons who had originally held reservations for the flight but had cancelled them shortly before the flight or failed to report for the flight at any of the stops made earlier. All officers conducting background investigations of the passengers were requested to obtain descriptions of the luggage they carried, as well as the probable contents of the luggage, in order that the material recovered could be identified with the individual victims. The purpose of requesting this information was so that, by a process of elimination, the owners of the luggage, which was mostly severely damaged or coated with a foreign residue, could be determined. A considerable quantity of personal effects of passenger victim Daisy E. King was recovered from the wreckage and closely examined by the agents. This material included a number of personal letters, newspaper clippings about her family, a personalised checkbook for $1,000 in traveller's checks, an address list, and 2 keys and a receipt for safety deposit boxes rented by Daisy. These articles revealed considerable information about the background of Daisy. One of the newspaper clippings reflected that her son, Jack, had been charged with forgery by the Denver County District Attorney and been placed on the local most wanted list by that office in 1951. From the fact that most of these personal effects of Daisy was found on or near her body, it was apparent that she had been carrying them in personal handbags at the time of the crash rather than in her luggage. Despite careful searching, practically none of the contents of Daisy's luggage was recovered. The only small bits of her suitcase believed to belong to her were found. Immediate effort to determine the identity of passengers, on which large amounts of trip insurance had been obtained, revealed 6 passengers had a minimum of $62,500. Because of a holiday weekend, however, a complete check of all companies writing such insurance was not possible at once, and among policies located later were 3 on the life of Daisy E. King. During a thorough search of the home of Jack on the 13th of November 1955, a duplicate travel insurance policy on the life of his mother in the amount of $37,500 was found hidden in a small cedar chest in the bedroom of the Graham house. The original of this policy, with designated beneficiary as Jack, was later located and made available by the insuring company, as well as 2 additional policies, each in the amount of $6,250 on the life of Daisy, with designated beneficiaries being her daughter and 1 living sister. During the investigation into the background of the passengers boarding the plane at Denver, particular emphasis was placed upon the background of Daisy and her relatives. It was learned that upon the passing of his mother, Jack was to receive a substantial inheritance. It also became known that Daisy and Jack had frequently argued over insignificant differences. During his early life, Jack had lived with relatives on several occasions, and he had actually left home when he was approximately 16 years old. Another person interviewed, one who had business associations with them through the operation of a drive-in restaurant in Denver, volunteered the information that Daisy continually had trouble with Jack over operation of the restaurant, that in fact they fought like cats and dogs, that the restaurant building had been damaged by an explosion at one time, that Jack may have been making money from the receipts of the business, and Jack had once told him that he performed demolition work in the US Navy, and that Jack had recently purchased a new truck and wrecked it in a possible attempt to collect insurance. Another individual expressed essentially the same suspicions about the past activities of Jack. This person further advised that the wrecking of Jack's truck was due to it being stalled on a railroad track where it was hit by a train sometime in 1955. He also advised that the local supply concern had a $1,000 note signed by Jack and secured by equipment of the drive-in restaurant. The extensive records of the Denver County Probation Department relative to Jack were thoroughly reviewed on the 10th of November 1955. These records revealed that Jack had been employed as a payroll clerk at a manufacturing concern in Denver in March 1951, which he had stolen a number of blank checks and used a company check protector in filing out some 42 of them for $100 each, after which he forged the name of the company owner and cashed the checks in various businesses in Denver. He had received approximately $4,200 in cash and immediately spent approximately $2,000 for a late model convertible car which he had left in Denver. The whereabouts of Jack were unknown until his arrest on the 11th of September 1951 at Lubbock, Texas, on the charge of hauling whiskey in violation of Texas laws. He had served a sentence of 60 days in the county jail after conviction and had been released to the Denver County District Attorney's Office to face charges of forgery in connection to his check-passing activities. According to the records, the arrest of Jack had been effected only after he had run a roadblock manned by local officers and shots had been fired into his car by the officers. At the time, it was found that he also had a gun in his car. Jack had been convicted of the forgery charge in State District Court at Denver, Colorado on the 3rd of November 1951, but the sentence was suspended and he had been placed on probation for a period of 5 years. The records reflected that cash restitution in the amount of $2,500 had been made at the time of the trial. Under the terms of the probation granted, Jack was made further restitution of the amount of $1,805.34 at the rate of $40 per month. Jack had regularly made these payments between the 2nd of January 1952 and the 3rd of November 1955, reducing the outstanding balance to $105.34. These records reveal that Jack had served in the US Coast Guard from April 1948 to January 1949, and that he had received an honourable discharge on the basis of minority. However, a notion was made on his records reflected that he had been AWOL for a period of 63 days during his service. He was last stationed at the Coast Guard installation at Groton, Connecticut, holding the rank of Motorman 3rd Class at the time of his discharge. Jack had completed 9th grade in public schools but was later granted a high school diploma upon his passing of entrance examinations at Denver University and was admitted as a student there. The probation reports reflected that Jack didn't realise the seriousness of the offence at the time of his arrest, and that his mother had been overprotective of her son, and that Jack had led a rather wild life and had spent most of the money, which he realised from his crime, on drinking parties and women. Jack had regularly reported to the probation department on a monthly basis, and had held regular employment as a heavy-duty equipment mechanic the majority of the time between January 1953 and December 1954. Later he moved to Denver, where during the early part of 1955 he was employed by his mother as manager of her drive-in restaurant. Jack was initially interviewed on the 10th of November 1955 in the company of his half-sister. During the initial interview, Jack furnished the following background information regarding himself and his family. Jack stated that he was born on the 23rd of January 1932 in Denver, Colorado, that his father was William Graham, who passed away when he was approximately 3 years old, and that his mother was Daisy E. King. He stated that Daisy married John Earl King in 1941, and from that time until 1948 they resided on a ranch near Taponzas, Colorado. Most of the ranch was sold in 1948, his mother and stepfather maintaining residence in Yampa, Colorado from that time until the passing of John Earl King on the 16th of October 1954. Following the passing from heart disease, Daisy and her daughter went to Goodland, Florida, where Daisy owned and maintained a house on Marco Island. Daisy remained there until February 1955, when she returned to Denver to assist Jack's wife Gloria, who had just given birth to their second baby. According to Jack, following Daisy's return to Denver, she resided at his home, 2650 West Mississippi Avenue, except for periods which she spent in Steamboat Springs at Yampa, Colorado, supervising business interests and additional trips out of the state. He said that his mother had purchased the residence at 2650 West Mississippi Avenue for him in December 1954 and had considered this residence her home. Jack stated that in the spring of 1955 his mother had purchased the property, built, equipped and maintained a drive-in restaurant at 581 South Federal Boulevard, Denver, which he managed. He said that the drive-in business at Denver was not a financial success, although he indicated it was successful when he was able to actually operate the business. Jack volunteered that during May 1955, some unknown vandals caused considerable damage to the window glass at the drive-in, and further that in September 1955 an explosion and fire had occurred at the drive-in during the early morning hours. According to Jack, an examination of the drive-in had revealed that someone had disconnected a gas line connection, allowing the gas to flow into the room, accumulating until it reached a pilot light on a water heater, igniting the gas and causing an explosion. According to Jack, $3 in small change was missing from the cash register, and some of the furniture of the drive-in had maliciously been broken. The total damage had amounted to approximately $1,200. Jack volunteered that he'd suffered some misfortune in connection with a new 1955 Chevrolet pickup which had stalled on a railroad track and had been hit by a train. At this interview, Jack furnished information about the activities of his mother on the 1st of November 1955, as well as her intended plans in connection to a trip to Alaska. He furnished a description of Daisy's luggage, including what she'd shipped on her airline ticket and what she'd carried with her on the plane. He claimed virtually no knowledge of the contents of his mother's luggage, saying that his mother would never allow anyone to actually assist in her packing, and further that he had not helped his mother in any of her packing or placed anything in her luggage. He stated that Daisy had a considerable quantity of shotgun shells and a rifle ammunition with her intended for use in hunting in Caribou, Alaska. On the 11th of November 1955, Miss Gloria A. Graham, wife of Jack, advised that she had married Jack in 1953 and had resided with him since that time. They had 2 children, approximately 20 and 9 months old. Gloria said that Daisy had resided with them at their home periodically from December 1954 until her death. Daisy travelled a great deal and had spent considerable part of the summer of 1955 supervising her business at Steamboat Springs, Colorado. Gloria furnished information concerning the activities of Daisy prior and including the 1st of November 1955. She furnished a description of the luggage taken by Daisy on her intended trip to Alaska, but she was unable to furnish any definite information about the contents of the luggage. She explained that Daisy was very particular about packing her bags or suitcases and did not allow anyone to actually assist in her packing. Gloria said that her husband had given Daisy a present on the 1st of November 1955 before Daisy left for the airport. Gloria believed that the present consisted of a small set of tools such as drills, files, and cutting tools used for forming seashells into art objects. According to Gloria, her husband had talked to her earlier about obtaining such a tool set as a Christmas present for his mother. Gloria had no knowledge as to the details of the purchase of the Christmas present. However, she recalled that during the day of the 1st of November 1955, Jack had brought a package into the house and carried it to the basement where Daisy was packing her luggage. She recalled that the package was wrapped as a gift and was approximately 18 inches in length, 14 inches in width, and 3 inches in depth. She thought the package contained the tool set, but she did not know whether Jack had actually given it to his mother. She assumed that he had. Further interviews on the 11th and 12th of November 1955 with relatives and associates of Daisy and Jack failed to develop any additional information except that given on the 11th of November 1955 by a neighbour of one of Jack's relatives. This neighbour advised that she had heard that prior to Daisy's attended trip to Alaska, Jack was extremely interested in purchasing a toolkit which he intended to give his mother as a Christmas present. It was her understanding that Jack had searched the town of Denver and finally obtained the type of toolkit he wanted. She had heard that Jack had the gift wrapped in Christmas paper and placed it in his mother's luggage before she boarded the plane. This neighbour said that she also heard that shortly after Daisy left Denver aboard the plane, Jack became very ill and his face turned very white. She said that Jack and his wife Gloria had apparently heard someone make a statement to the effect that the aeroplane had crashed. The neighbour stated that she heard that Jack, upon hearing this statement, responded, "That is it." According to this neighbour, since the crash, Jack had not eaten or been able to sleep. He had spent most of his time walking up and down both inside and outside his home. Inasmuch as a description of the luggage taken by Daisy on her trip had been obtained, several broken and torn fragments of her luggage were brought to the Denver FBI office on the 12th of November 1955. The luggage generally matched the description of Daisy's luggage. On the 12th of November 1955, Jack and Gloria were contacted by telephone and told of the FBI's possession of these fragments of luggage and were requested at their convenience to come to the FBI office and attempt to identify any of the fragments as being portions of the luggage taken by Daisy on her intended flight to Alaska. Jack and Gloria voluntarily appeared at the Denver FBI office on the next day and the fragments of the luggage were exhibited to them. They identified some pieces of a dark brown suitcase as being the smaller suitcase taken on the trip by Daisy. They believed that a piece of red and black plaid canvas bag was possibly a portion of the canvas bag which she had taken with her. At the conclusion of their identification of these pieces of luggage, Jack was advised that the FBI desired to interview him further concerning several aspects of the case. Gloria was told that if she desired, she could return home to her small children, which she did. Jack was questioned specifically regarding the reported ammunition and Christmas gift which his mother took with her on her trip. The information Jack furnished concerning the ammunition was substantially the same as he had previously provided. The information about the Christmas present was not in accord with the information his wife Gloria had furnished. Jack stated that he intended to purchase a tool set for his mother, however, upon learning the type that he had intended to buy was not suitable for the purpose which it was to be used, he had never bought it. In explanation to his wife's statements, he said that it was possible that his wife was under the impression that he had actually purchased the tools. Jack then questioned in detail as to his activities upon the arrival at the Denver Municipal Airport on the 1st of November 1955, as he furnished substantially the same information as before. He could not offer no explanation as to why he mailed to himself a trip insurance policy taken out by his mother at the airport, making him the beneficiary, other than the fact that he had mailed two similar policies of which his sister and aunt were the beneficiaries. He said he believed that he put these insurance policies in the trash can at the airport inasmuch as he had not yet received the policy which he had mailed to himself. He volunteered that upon his mother's leaving on the plane, he and his wife and son had entered the airport coffee shop to have dinner. According to Jack, after they started to eat, he became ill and went to the men's bathroom for a short period. He believed his illness was due to the excitement about his mother's leaving, and further, he said that the food at the coffee shop was poor. In the statements of Jack at the time were not entirely in accord with those of Gloria. Agents of the FBI were sent to the Jack residence to interview Gloria and to obtain a signed statement about the part of her story which was in conflict with Jack's. Inasmuch as these discrepancies were present, Jack was at the time told that he was being considered by the FBI as a suspect in the case. He was told that he did not have to make any statement and that any statement which he did make could be used against him in a court of law. He was advised of his right to consult an attorney at the time. Jack stated that he had no objection to signing a statement indicating he would voluntarily submit to a polygraphic examination and further would sign any statements giving his consent to search any of his home, cars and property. He subsequently read and signed such statements. FBI agents were sent to make a search of Jack's home, cars and property. During the search of Jack's home, a small roll of copper wire with yellow insulation was located in his shirt pocket of some work clothing belonging to Jack. This wire appeared to be the type used in detonating primer caps. Also located was the trip insurance policy of Daisy, dated on the 1st of November 1955, on which Jack was the beneficiary. The policy was found hidden in a small cedar chest in one of the bedrooms at Jack's home. Subsequently, during the interview with Jack, he was questioned primarily concerning the discrepancies of his statements and those of his wife and other persons interviewed by the FBI. Agents were immediately sent to check the validity of Jack's additional statements. Upon their return, Jack was confronted with their findings, and on several matters he was unable to explain himself, the results of the agents' investigation. Jack, at this time, was informed of the findings of the FBI laboratory and their examination of fragments and pieces of the wreckage recovered from the crash scene. He then admitted causing the explosion that had occurred at the Dairy Drive-In which he managed in Denver, as well as leaving his 1955 Chevrolet on a railroad track and allowing it to be hit by an oncoming train. He finally admitted his guilt in the plane crash and described the device he had assembled and used to perpetrate the crime. He said that he had used a time bomb composed of 25 sticks of dynamite, 2 electric primer caps, a timer, and a 6-volt battery. A signed statement was obtained from him concerning these admissions, and on the 14th of November 1955, a complaint was filed before the U.S. Commissioner at Denver by Special Agent of the FBI charging Jack with sabotage. Jack thereafter appeared before the United States Commissioner, where he was advised of the charges against him and afforded an opportunity to make bond, recommended by the United States Attorney at $100,000. He was committed to the custody of the United States Marshal in lieu of bond. On the 17th of November 1955, Jack was charged with murder in the state court at Denver, Colorado, and was held without bail for further hearings. He was charged with the execution of his mother, Miss Daisy E. King, age 54. Subsequent to the arrest of Jack, investigation was instituted to locate the source of the items used by him in making of the time bomb. The investigation resulted in locating, on the 17th of November 1955, a supply company in Denver, Colorado, where Jack was identified as having purchased, on the 26th of October 1955, a 60-minute on-type timing device, which he exchanged a few days later for a 60 minutes off-type timing device. On the 19th of November 1955, a store manager at Kremlin, Colorado, recalled selling 20 or 25 sticks of dynamite and 2 electric blasting caps to an individual during October 1955. The store manager believed that Jack was identical with the individual to whom he had sold the dynamite and caps. On the 21st of November 1955, the manager identified Jack from being a lineup as being identical with the individual who had purchased the dynamite and blasting caps from him during October. Of considerable interest in the investigation of this case was the story of Jack's background as related by his half-sister. She stated that she had never in any time in recent years felt at ease with Jack. He was sullen, she knew him to have pent-up violence, and simply did not like to be around him. She said that in the past he had related things which he thought was funny, but she considered violent and warped. For example, when he was residing with her and her husband in Alaska, he had been employed as a dragline operator for the CAA, and on one occasion he had told them that he had experienced some difficulty in loosening a bolt at some equipment, so he obtained some dynamite and blew off the bolt. As a further example, he recalled that since the United Airlines plane crash, Jack had stated to her and his wife Gloria, as if it was a joke, "Can you just see those shotgun shells going off around the plane every which way, and the pilots, passengers, and Grandma jumping around?" His sister stated that for many years she had thought Jack was not mentally sound. She had expressed this opinion to both her husband and other relatives of Jack's. She recalled that on at least 2 occasions in the past she had been the object of her brother's violent temper. On one occasion he had knocked her down and kneed her in the chest so severely that her ribs were injured. On another he had threatened to hit her with a hammer, and she had escaped by locking herself in a room. She recalled that during the summer of 1955, Jack awoke from sleeping and found his wife gone. He located his wife playing cards with his sister and his mother, and for no apparent reason became enraged and cuffed and backhanded his wife several times. During this occurrence, Daisy had become extremely frightened, apparently afraid he might hit her. After 2 continuances, Jack was arraigned in Denver District Court on the 9th of December 1955. Immediately after his arrest, he had transferred most of his property to his wife, Gloria, declared himself unable to pay counsel, and accepted the services of 3 prominent Denver attorneys appointed by the court. The state of Colorado charged Jack with the execution of his mother. His pleas were innocent and innocent by reason of insanity before, during, and after the alleged commission of the crime. The court accepted only the previously mentioned pleas. Jack was ordered to Colorado Psychopathic Hospital for examination by 2 defense and 2 court-appointed psychiatrists. During the course of an interview with one of these doctors, he made a claim concerning his confession of the crime. Jack was found legally sane by all 4 psychiatrists and returned to the Denver County Jail. He was a model prisoner. His days in jail were spent quietly reading and chatting with the guards. After dinner on the evening of the 10th of February 1956, about 5:30 p.m, a deputy sheriff was attracted to Jack's cell, where he was found, heavy breathing and slumped on the floor. His socks were twisted tightly around his neck with a piece of rolled cardboard used to get added leverage. Quickly, the guard loosened the sock, a doctor was summoned immediately, and sedatives were administered. Jack was placed in a straitjacket to subdue him through the night. The following day, he was again returned to the psychiatric ward in Colorado General Hospital, where he was strapped to the bed with 4 guards posted nearby. No more chances were going to be taken with him now. Jack was under 24-hour surveillance by watchful attendants. The psychiatrists again began to talk to him. He was quite communicative and talked freely about himself. He said that his confession of the unaliving of the people on the plane was quite true. He said that after he decided definitely to execute his mother, he had bought a timer and some dynamite and fashioned a homemade bomb. He had assembled the bomb while his mother was busy with last-minute details of her trip. He had slipped it into an old battered suitcase and fastened the suitcase with some extra webbing for security. They had then left for the airport. His wife and children had gone along to see their grandmother off. Jack had dropped his mother and the family off at the door to the terminal before taking the car to the parking lot. Before removing the suitcase from the car, he had set the timer on the bomb. He had next taken his mother's luggage to the weighing counter for weighing before it was placed on the plane. The doctors, curious about his feelings about the crime, were told by him that he realised that there were about 50 or 60 people carried on a DCP, but the number of people to be executed made no difference to me. It could have been 1,000. When their time comes, there is nothing they can do about it. Based on previous evidence as to Jack's criminal record, as well as his contradictory statements, physical evidence found at Jack's home, and finally a confession, Jack was charged with sabotage and then later murder. After Jack's arrest, Denver radio station KDEN owner Gene Amol and Rocky Mountains news photographer Morley Engel surreptitiously brought a camera into the jail for an interview with Jack during a reunion with his wife Gloria. "I loved my mother very much," Jack told Amol. "She meant a lot to me. It's very hard for me to tell exactly how I feel. She left so much of herself behind." When Amol asked him why he confessed, he said that the FBI had threatened to point out the inconsistencies in statements made by his wife Gloria. "I was not about to let them touch her in any way, shape or form," he said. None of the Denver TV stations would agree to air the film at the time, though it was eventually aired on one of Denver's local PBS stations as part of a documentary. Jack's confessions gave details about the bomb that matched the evidence from the plane's wreckage. Jack's trial led to Colorado becoming the first state to officially sanction the broadcast of criminal trials on television. No federal statute at the time made it a crime to blow up an airplane. Therefore, on the day after Jack's confession, the Colorado District Attorney moved to prosecute Jack via the simplest possible route: premeditated murder of a single victim, his mother, Daisy. Jack recanted his confession, but at his 1956 trial, his defense was unable to counter the massive amount of evidence presented by the prosecution. On the 5th of May 1956, Jack was convicted of the murder of his mother and was sentenced to death. Jack was executed at the Colorado State Penitentiary gas chamber on the 11th of January 1953. Jack was executed in the Colorado State Penitentiary gas chamber on the 11th of January 1957. One source has his final words being, "Thanks, Warden," after Warden Tinsley patted him on the shoulder. Time magazine quoted a lengthier statement. "As far as feeling remorse for those people, I don't. I can't help it. Everybody pays their way and takes their chances. That's just the way it goes." The Colorado Supreme Court in December 1955 had imposed a ban on any photography in Colorado State Court in accordance with Canon 35 of the American Bar Association. Following public hearings, the Supreme Court reversed its decision. The judge who later presided at the trial of Jack ruled against live television coverage, but in the favour of sound on film, press photography and radio broadcasts. Jack, through his attorneys, requested that television cameras be banned from his trial. The judge ruled to permit some and ban others. However, the judge added that if any witness or the defendant objected to being photographed, he had only to say so and his wishes in the matter would be respected. Jack was the only person who actually made the request during the trial. The judge had a remote control switch on the bench which enabled him to cut off the camera when necessary. A booth was built in the back corner of the courtroom for the camera equipment. One local newspaper installed a direct telephone line from the court to its editorial room. Representatives of the wire services installed teletype machines and telephones specifically provided City Hall space near the courtroom. A limited number of photographers, including some representing national coverage, received written permission to use small cameras without flash. The trial set an all-time record for the state of Colorado in the number of jurors examined. In all, 231 were called, the two main objections the panel members being that they held fixed opinions on Jack's guilt or innocence, or that they were opposed to capital punishment. The final jury included 2 housewives, 2 typists, a movie executive, an engineer, a truck driver, a sales lady, a telephone man, a lithographer, a bookkeeper, and a salesman. On the first day and almost throughout the trial, hundreds of people waited for hours in the halls outside of the courtroom, hoping for a chance to get seats. They brought their lunches, afraid to leave the room for fear of losing their places. The guard at the door, however, saved a seat for one woman who arrived promptly at 9 a.m. every morning. She was the wife of the United States pilot of the ill-fated flight. She sat only a few feet from Jack throughout the trial. Jack was apparently supremely calm and unconcerned during the proceedings. He had lost weight since his arrest, but he still looked healthy and was not thin. He wore a neat suit each day. He slouched in his chair, chewed gum, and occasionally conferred with his attorneys. The district attorney, in his opening statement to the jury, said that the state would prove Jack had planned the murder of his mother, coldly, carefully, and deliberately. He said that one of the items of evidence the prosecution would produce was a yellow piece of wire, the same type used on the electric dynamite caps. This piece of wire was the one which had been found in Jack's home during the search conducted by agents of the FBI. Prosecution witnesses and exhibits would prove that Jack had brought about 25 sticks of dynamite, a timer, a battery, and the dynamite caps which he had placed in his mother's luggage. The foundation testimony concerned the jurisdiction of the Denver District Court to hear the case, the flight schedule of the United States mainliner, and identification of Miss Daisy E. King's photograph. Testimony established that Mrs. King and her luggage were on the aeroplane when it left Stapleton Airfield, Denver on the 1st of November 1955. The ground crew personnel testified that the aeroplane was functioning properly when it took off for Denver. 6 state witnesses described the explosion of the DC-6B airliner at 7:03 p.m. a few miles east of Longmont, Colorado. United Airlines employees, Civil Aeronautics Board investigators, and a Douglas Aircraft Corporation engineer testified, introducing testimony describing the crash scene, removal of bodies, preservation and identification of pieces of aeroplane wreckage, and the removal of wreckage and debris. 3 of these witnesses testified that the explosion had taken place in Cargo Pit 4. On the 9th day of the trial, the spotlight shifted to federal court for hearing and on a defense motion to eliminate FBI's testimony and evidence. The defense attorneys contended that the FBI testimony was illegal, that Jack had not been advised of his rights before he signed the confession, and that he had been obtained under duress. It was contended that Jack's home had been searched and evidence obtained without his consent. The federal judge dismissed the motion following testimony by FBI agents that Jack had been fully advised of his rights and had not been mistreated during his questioning before he signed the confession. The agents also produced 8 waivers of search which Jack had signed. Back in state court, the trial continued. The FBI laboratory expert identified the grey deposits on the airplane parts from the area of the cargo pit as the residue left by the explosion of dynamite. He also identified a number of pieces of metal and carbon which had been found in the wreckage and debris of the crash as having come from a particular type of battery. The FBI testified that the wire found in Jack's shirt pocket during the search of his home was identical in all examinable respects with the wire from the electric dynamite cap. The owner of an electric company testified that Jack had come in early in October 1955 and offered to work at a nominal wage to get more experience. Jack had been hired and had worked for 1 week. On the final day of his employment, he had asked his employer what timing devices he carried, saying that he needed a timer which could be used with a battery and which would not exceed 2 hours. Jack had been told to go to an appliance store where he could get a timer operated with a spring. A salesman for a Denver Electric wholesale house testified he had sold Jack a 60-minute timer during the latter part of October, that Jack had represented himself as an employee of the Colorado Texas Pump Company in order to purchase the timer. The credit manager from a Denver, Colorado Chevrolet company testified that Jack had been unable to pay a $50 deductible item on the insurance loss of his 1955 Chevrolet pickup truck, which they had repaired as a result of an accident. Jack had told the manager that his bank account was held jointly with his mother and was all tied up. Jack had then commented on how easy it would be to blow up an aeroplane. He had estimated that it would take about 2 gallons of nitroglycerin. He had observed the manner in which luggage was handled at Stapleton Airport, he said, and it would be easy for someone to place a bomb on the aeroplane. The prosecution rested its case on the afternoon of the 15th day of the trial. Approximately 80 different witnesses had testified and had introduced 174 exhibits during the course of the proceedings. During the course of the prosecution testimony, Jack had made statements to the press saying that when he took the stand, he would refute their testimony, tell the truth, and clear himself. However, he refused to testify at all in his own behalf, and none of the 8 witnesses called on could offer any evidence rebuting the testimony and evidence that Jack had placed a dynamite bomb in his mother's luggage.